What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. We've taken quite a journey, haven't we, over this? But God, it's been a long time now, probably almost 48 weeks that we've been exploring the 12 steps and how they help us develop what we've called an authentic self-esteem, and how that authentic self-esteem relates to emotional sobriety. And tonight we come to an end of that journey. This will be the last workshop that focuses on the steps in self-esteem and emotional sobriety. Next week, we will start our journey through my book, 12 Essential Insights. We will be taking a chapter at a time, and the four of us to each of us will be taking a piece of that chapter and leading a discussion or a presentation about what stood out for that person in that chapter. And we will work our way through all 12 of those insights over the next 48 weeks. So that's what's on the agenda. And I'm very excited about that. I think it's going to be, I'm very excited to hear what my colleagues are going to say about some of the insights, and to extend and to expand on the discussion. So that's what we're looking for starting next week. And we haven't decided who's going to kick it off yet, but I imagine maybe the author of the book should do that. And I guess that's me. So I'll probably kick it off next week, unless Roger really twists my arm over this next week, that he'll kick it off. He's not going to twist my arm. No. So I'll be starting next week. Well, here we are at step 12, and what a journey it's been. Those of you who have worked the 12 steps understand the incredible impact that the 12 steps have had on your life. I'm just going to read the step just as a starting point for tonight. So step 12 reads, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Now, if you have not gotten a hold of the 12 steps and 12 traditions that Bill wrote in 1950 and was published, I think, in 1952, I encourage you to get a hold of this, because in many of these pages, he really weaves his understanding and ideas of emotional sobriety throughout each chapter. And this step especially, he's devoted the most number of pages to a discussion of step 12. And that's because of the richness that has occurred in our lives as a result of getting here. We've made incredible strides towards changing ourselves, towards changing our relationship to ourselves, towards changing our relationship to our problems, towards changing our relationship to others, towards changing our relationship to life itself, and towards changing our relationship with the God of our understanding, or the mystery, as Herb likes to call it, right? It's a remarkable transformation that's occurred. I am a PhD clinical psychologist, and I can tell you that there is no other program that I know of that is as complete and thorough in the transformation that this program creates in a person's life. So please understand that the therapeutic value of the 12 steps is really remarkable. It really seems to be a divine gift that we've been given. And those of us that are fortunate enough to be taking this journey and following this path discover something very, very precious. Bill said when he was talking about this step in the first paragraph, he says, here we begin to practice all of the steps, all of the 12 steps of the program in our daily lives, so that we and those about us may find emotional sobriety. So here he explicitly writes that the goal of working the steps was first physical sobriety. That happened in the first half of first step one. And everything else has been based on building, right, a foundation. The way I like to think about it is creating a consciousness that is a consciousness of emotional sobriety. It's remarkable what happens. He goes on in this and says, this is a result of practicing all of the steps. And you've heard, and I love how Tom Rutledge keeps bringing us back to that. This is a practice. And practice means we're not going to do this thing perfectly. But the issue here is our effort, not doing it perfectly, but that we keep showing up and keep trying to plug this stuff in and keep trying to learn from our mistakes. You see, when I was in graduate school, one of the questions that came up is there such a thing as an alcoholic personality or an addict personality? And almost everybody will say, I think there is, I think there is. And the truth of it is that once alcoholism or addiction develops, the characteristics of that person in terms of what they've become are very similar. But who becomes an alcoholic and or an addict? There is no one personality. We say it's an equal opportunity destroyer in our lives. But the one characteristic that stands out across the board for alcoholics and addicts is that we do not learn from our experience. That is the one commonality that existed that I could find when I did the literature review, that we do not learn from our experience. One way of looking at the therapeutic value of the 12 steps, it's a restoration of our ability to learn from our experience. It's a systematic approach on how to unpack the experiences we're having in our life and gain knowledge and emotional wisdom from our pain and from our suffering. That's a remarkable gift. You know, many people call it the magic of the program. That's where the magic lies. Is we be given, Herb and I've talked one time about the alchemy of recovery, and we really have found a way to turn lead into gold. That's what's happening here. We turn lead into gold by taking it through this process that we have. He goes on to say, we've been granted a gift which amounts to a new state of consciousness and being. We have a new state of consciousness. Now, what is that consciousness? How is that consciousness different than before? Well, before, that consciousness was so deeply rooted in the "it's all about me" syndrome. We made everything about us. We were so self-centered, so filled with self-will. And one way our consciousness has started to change is we've started to, at least to some degree, challenge the idea that maybe that's the big lie, that it's all about me. It might not be. I love how Tom Rutledge says sometimes we just have to bring a reasonable doubt to some of these things that we've believed in all our life and just question that this may not be as true as we thought it was. Very important to keep that attitude, because this new consciousness is also based on a consciousness of curiosity. You see, now we want to understand what's going on. Before we didn't. Before we would turn our eyes, we didn't want to look at it. We avoided it. We didn't want to deal with our pain. We didn't want to deal with our trauma. I didn't want to deal with my pain. I didn't want to deal with my trauma. And now, coming into the program, I see that I can have a relationship to my pain and trauma in a way that's going to grow me, where I don't have to be defined by the pain or the trauma. I get to be defined by how I'm coping with it and what I'm doing with it and how I'm digesting it and growing from it. That's the incredible experience that we're having here. He says this new consciousness, we find ourselves a possession of a degree of honesty that we've never had. our ability to be honest with ourselves is so different by the time we end up getting to step 12. We really have found that the best of us can see the worst of us. And we can go ahead and identify things in our character and in our personality and our behavior that we wouldn't have touched before with a 10-foot pole. I would never have admitted some of those things about me. We develop a tolerance, because when you don't make it all about you, then you can understand that there's room for other people and who they are. It's not just all about the way we want things to be. There's an unselfishness, as I told you before. It's not all about me. There's a peace of mind. And we develop the ability to love, which we had thought ourselves quite incapable of doing. At one point, we're going to talk about in the future authentic love, because that's what this program is developing in us, the ability to have an authentic love. And with an authentic love, it means that there's room for two people in a relationship, not just room for you and your rules and your ideas about how things have to be. But authentic love is big, it's roomy. It respects you and me. That's what it's based on. He talks about this being a transformation, because we have tapped into a consciousness, a way of being in the world that none of us knew about. We were all ignorant when we walked in these doors. And that's not to put us down. It's just a description of how we start this journey. Now, as we go through, as we did our inventory and stuff, we started to realize how emotionally dependent we were. And this chapter does a great job of Bill being able to discuss what that means and how it's damaged our relationships. And we'll continue to do that unless we clean up these things. But he says that when you start to work with other people, a miracle starts to happen. He says to watch the eyes of men and women open with wonder as they move from darkness into light, to see their lives quickly fill with a new purpose and meaning, to see whole families reassembled, to see the alcoholic's outcast received back into his community in full citizenship, and above all, to watch those people awaken to the presence of a new consciousness in their life. That's a gift that we get when we start working with others. And that's why service is such an important part of the recovery journey. Now, I want to talk to you about Viktor Frankl's observation, because Viktor Frankl was the author of Man's Search for Meaning. And this is what he said. And this is really at the basis of what Bill was capturing when he talked about working with others. Dr. Frankl says, true meaning of life is to be discovered in the world rather than within man or his own psyche. I'll say that again. The true meaning of life is to be discovered in the world rather than within man or his own psyche. He says, I have termed this constitutive characteristic the self-transcendence of human existence. We will call it the self-transcendence of the it's all about me syndrome. We go beyond that and we start to see others. He goes, but the effect of this is, the value of this, that it points to the fact that being human always points and is directed to something or someone other than oneself. The more one forgets himself by giving himself to a cause to serve or love another person, the more human he is and the more he actualizes himself. One of my favorite authors is James Hillman, and he wrote a wonderful book that said, we've had 100 years of psychotherapy and the world keeps getting worse. I'll say that title again. You don't have to read the book to get the essence of the book. We've had 100 years of psychotherapy and the world keeps getting worse. Because what does psychotherapy do? It takes people into themselves. It takes people into looking at themselves. It focuses on self. Only recently have we seen a whole new revolution in psychotherapy being called relationally based psychotherapy, which is really paying attention to our connections with others. But up to this point, it's been all about us. And we go into therapy talking about ourselves, and we go into therapy looking at ourselves and focusing on ourselves. We've had 100 years of psychotherapy, and the world keeps getting worse. Well, here's the antidote, right? That Bill saw, right? Is helping other people, right? Now, the last part of that step is this, practicing these principles in all our affairs. And I started to pound this drum the last couple times that I've made comments on the other people's discussion. Is integration is at the heart of transformation. You can't have a transformation in your life unless you have integrated the experiences you've had. Integration creates transformation. Integration changes our consciousness. As we absorb more, as we as we learn more, as we develop more, our consciousness changes as a result of integration. We start to expand our consciousness. That's what this step is about. It's an expansion of our consciousness like never before. And we didn't have to go do ayahuasca or ketamine treatment to get there. We have to pay a price. We have to do some very hard work with the steps. Ayahuasca is easier. You just go show up for a weekend and do it. It's to work in the steps. It takes some effort. Join Herb's workshop. You'll understand very much what that means by the end of that year in terms of the amount of work it takes to really thoroughly work and practice these steps in our life. But that is what creates this transformation, is we're integrating these principles to the best of our ability with an understanding of that at this point in my life, I will be able, or let me say this, at a future date in my life, I will be able to integrate these things differently than I'm integrating them now. Bill said that very clearly, that more will be revealed. Rumi had this one poem that went, how is it with one rose that you can get a whole rose garden? Well, that's what the 12 steps do. One rose gives you a rose garden. It creates an incredible experience in our lives. The richness of it, the depth of it, the possibilities that it opens up in our life, we could have never imagined at the beginning of our journey when we walked in these doors, broken, bankrupt, emotionally, spiritually. So it's a remarkable journey. Now, how does this relate to the emotional sobriety and self-esteem? Well, look, we're finally now paying attention to what Brandon called a pillar of self-esteem, and that is operating with our integrity. Practicing these principles in all our affairs means that we're living with integrity. We're paying attention to ourselves and our values and what's important to us, and we're not overriding them. And when we do, we realize that we pay a heavy price and we got to get back there and clean it up as quickly as we can. And if we don't, we relapse. That's what we know happens. That's what sends a lot of people back out. They start playing those games and compromising their integrity, and before they know it, they're back in the bottle, or they're back using their pills again, or whatever it is. Integrity is not optional anymore for us. It's very important in the program, and it's a pillar of our self-esteem. We can talk about go through all the other pillars. We've raised our consciousness, right? We've learned to be more appropriately assertive. We act for ourselves without impinging on the rights of others. We learn to act for ourselves without being selfish, and we learn to act for others without being selfless. We've created that balance that Declan was talking about earlier on in life. Now, none of these things were a part of our consciousness when we began this journey. We were in pain and we wanted it to stop. That's that's all we could see. That's all that we could see on our horizon. Now our vista has opened up, incredibly so. And that's why I define recovery as the discovery of new possibilities. It's a shift in our consciousness from that shift of a consciousness that says I'm okay if to a consciousness that says I'm okay even if. That is the summary of what has happened to our consciousness. Now, that doesn't mean with every trial or tribulation in your life, you recover your balance immediately. Those of you who have known about my trials and tribulations in my life is I've been knocked down, and not down and out, but I've been knocked down for 3 or 4 months now. I'm starting to come back. It's taken a while to get my feet back under me. But, thanks to all of the love I've received and support from all of you and from my close friends, Roger has been there for me every day we talk, and he, gives me a shoulder to cry on and a perspective to hang on to. And Herb has done that, and Tom Rutledge has done that. And a few other close friends have done that, and I've appreciated it so much. We can do what I can't do. I couldn't have gotten through this without you, Raj. Thank you, my friend. And you too, Herb, and you too, Tom, if you're here. And all of those of you that have reached out to me has meant so much. But that's the other part of it. Now we're in a community that's based on love. I don't have to be someone I'm not. I could come to you with my disappointment, with my depression. I could be authentic and open with you about it. It didn't have to be a Dr. Berger that has all the answers. I don't. I could come to you broken and open and vulnerable and in pain. So that's the journey we've been on. And it's been wonderful sharing it with all of you through these months, through all of these talks we've had. And I'm looking forward to our next challenge here as we tackle the book 12 Essential Insights. So with that being said, let me open up the room to Roger and Herb and Tom, if you are here. Herb, you're still muted, so why don't you're not in that silent, you're not in the monastery anymore. You don't have to stay silent anymore.
No, I tried, but I think there was a control on it. Right.
Well, good evening, gentlemen. So Tom will not be joining us tonight. He's not feeling well enough. So what would you guys like to say as we wrap up this discussion?
Roger, would you like to go first, or would you like me to go first?
Why don't you, I'll percolate a little bit longer if that's okay with you, Herb. Go ahead, man.
Well, I have four pages of percolation notes right here. And I'll try to distill them. As you know, I'm quite passionate about the effectiveness of the 12-step process. And it's been put on steroids with the connection to emotional sobriety, then with the connection to the information and experience that's been shared about self-esteem, and everything is like coming together. I know the word synergy sometimes is expressed as the sum of the parts. The whole is larger than the sum of its parts. And that's what, Alan, I think you were talking about in terms of the experience of the work that we're doing here, but going back even just to the 12-step process itself. And that's why I've dedicated actually my life to it at this point. Most of my waking hours is about how to communicate this message more effectively so that people get some motivation, certainly, but get some traction and willingness to actually do this work. And even in listening to you, Alan, I wanted to, oh my God, have the next 2 hours for us all to talk about it, because it's so rich. And I know other people like myself are making a whole lot of notes. And the best part I realized is I don't have to look at my notes. I don't have to remember my notes, because I have marinated in this work and this process and this curiosity that has created the energy to give me the willingness to do some work and to reap the benefits from it. And it's integrated. It's part of the fabric now. Sure, I make notes in order to give myself some track a little bit sometimes, or to give myself some additional insights. as a result of this work, the 12-step process especially, and the recent work that we've done, and maybe it was Tom Rutledge that said it, but we practice these principles in all our affairs. Our way of life is steps 10 a practice, step 11 a practice, step 12 a practice, and I've been using those terms but out of this last year, it's been we practice life. That's what we do. We just practice on a daily basis. And early on, through this process of the self-esteem, it was very clear we make mistakes, but we learn from our mistakes. I'm not my mistake. I just learn from it. I integrate it. And as a result, I make less mistakes, less frequently, and I'm correcting them more effectively on a regular basis as a result of the tools of consciousness. And I also, we're in step 12. I do really believe there's a very subtle but very profound effect from helping other people, where that integration becomes part of an organic structure. I have no way of scientifically describing what I'm talking about, but there is something that happens to me when I'm attempting to deliver some sense of help or compassion or training or practice to other people. At the conclusion of my very first workshop 27 years ago, my wife was invited to our final dinner, and I'm going to end with this. It's all spontaneous coming up, but anyway, she didn't attend the weekly workshop for the year, but when we had a dinner at the suggestion of the participants to celebrate sort of the graduation kind of thing, they said, well, why don't you invite your wife? We want to thank her for supporting you being absent and helping us do this thing. And I said, great. And she was willing, and she came, and you know how Mary is, Alan, you know her. And she was very quiet. And of course, as part of the witness to the process for the year, the people were very excited, and they shared lots of wonderful experiences themselves and threw lots of flowers at my feet, which I just hated, but I accepted it. Yeah, right. Exactly. But at the end, Mary said, I'd like to share. And she said, I still get choked up. She said, I'd like to thank you for what you've done for Herb. I would like to thank you for what you've done for Herb. He's a better man because of the time he has spent with you. It doesn't get better than that.
Yeah, right on, man. There it is. There it is.
That's very touching for me, Herb, and obviously it is for you as well. Thank you for sharing that story, because isn't it true? I mean, isn't it true that we can see it as, this person or this group of people owes a person, Alan or Herb or whoever, but it's really, if deeply enough understood, it's always mutual, right? It always goes both ways. That in service, we are transformed. In service, we are transformed. And the experience of that is, I talked last week about interbeing and the interconnectedness of everything and so on. But it really is true, like you said, Alan. It's not that individual psychotherapy and self-focus is a bad thing, and I know you're not saying that, Alan. It's incredibly important to learn about ourselves and increase our awareness about ourselves and our depth of understanding, our consciousness. But a hugely important piece is missing if we don't focus on relatedness, if we don't focus on, as I've talked about it, our deep-seated need to not just receive love from other people, but to give attention and care and love and information and, whatever helps fill a need to other people as well. Alan, you were talking about how, that the 12 steps have so much psychological benefit for people, and the psychological help that the 12 steps give. I remember in a tape lecture, I think it was on YouTube, I heard Father Richard Rohr, who you guys have mentioned from time to time, a well-known Franciscan priest. He said that the 12 steps were the best program for spiritual development that he was aware of.
Yeah.
And for a priest, that's a pretty powerful thing to say,
Sure
right?
is.
But as far as, if you think about it, as you guys have gone through it, as we've gone through it, all the elements in it, not just understanding and insight, but taking action and making amends and looking deeply at ourselves, again, all those elements are not just part of psychological growth, they're part of spiritual growth from my perspective, and part of, as you mentioned, Alan, part of growth in our self-respect and our self-confidence, the major components of self-esteem. You were talking about integrity, Alan, and you brought it up as well, Herb, that the 12 steps are such a deep and abiding part of your of who you are, Herb. But you've devoted such, not just so much time, but depth of being at all levels, not just your intellect, but your soul, your spirit. You, like nobody I've ever known, you have lived and breathed the 12-step process, and it comes through all the time how integrated those steps are in your life. At a psychological level, just to give one example, I know that over the course of my life, through my initial inspiration and personal therapy with Nathaniel Brandon as my therapist, and then the somatic therapy work through somebody I met through Nathaniel, a guy named Chuck Kelly, who taught a kind of somatic body work. Things that I would have never dreamed of doing in my early 20s, in terms of talking, revealing things about myself to other people, or at least the intense level of anxiety that I would have gone through, sharing things about my own imperfections and so on, that now, 50 years later, right, and with a lot of work on especially self-acceptance and the meaning of integrity, which Alan just mentioned, and trying to practice that. Two things. One is I'm still nowhere near perfect, right? And I know I won't be at any point in time, that it really is a process and really is about progress. But I do feel so much more able to just be me, right? And to realize that I can be scared, I can be sad, I can be angry, I can be unspiritual, I can be whatever I am in a particular moment. And if I can find a way to just talk about that, it invariably helps me. It invariably helps me become more self-accepting and more able to accept others. So, and I'm all those things all the time, frightened and angry and scared. Those feelings come up for me every day, and sad or disappointed. And usually I don't think in my head, well, I'm going to be mature and I'm not going to let this get the best of me. And I'm going to be, I'm going to find balance. I just try to let myself experience whatever the hell it is I'm going through. And Alan, I've admired so much your courage and willingness to follow that principle in recent months while you've been going through a very, very tough time. This idea of emotional maturity and balance, as you said beautifully, Herb, once, it made me, I can't remember the exact words you used. I wish I could. But you were talking about, emotional maturity or something like that. And you said, now make no mistake, it will hurt, okay? There will be pain. There will be disappointment. And I was so happy to hear you put that in. because I know you deeply understand that, but that can get lost when we're talking about, highfalutin spiritual ideas and ideals. That gut-wrenching, very painful, very depressing, very anxiety-provoking reality of our experience is just a part of this process. It doesn't mean anything's wrong with us. It just means we're alive. As we talk about in emotion-centered work, if we're open to feeling the highs of life, we got to be open to feeling the lows as well. Or we can, in the process of our development, just allow our emotional range to shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink. And very often unconsciously and almost without intention, that's the path that we take. But we can always learn to wake up again. We can always learn to wake up again. And it starts with telling the truth about what we're actually experiencing. That doesn't mean always acting it out, right? That can very often deepen the distress we're in. But being conscious of it and communicating it, if our context feels at all safe for us to do that in, because that is a piece of it as well, that's the path forward, I think. So I just want to thank you, Herb, and thank you, Alan, and thank Tom and Declan and Brian and Tom Potash and everyone associated with this process, because I have learned a lot by listening to you guys and by what those of you participating in this workshop have shared about your own experience. You really do give so much, as Herb was referencing. His wife thanked everyone for the transformation that they had been a critical part of in your life, Herb. And I can only imagine how deeply heartfelt, and I didn't even know Mary, right?
Right.
But I can only imagine how deeply appreciative she was, right? of that transformation, right? I'm sure it meant the world to her as it has to you. So that's what I wanted to share tonight. Thank you, everyone here, including everyone in attendance. This is a community, and I'm deeply appreciative and grateful. It's helped me a lot get through some health challenges that I faced the last couple of years as well. I love what you said, Ellen. What I cannot do alone, we can do together. And one of the most important things for us to learn is oftentimes if I can't find my way, or I've lost my way, or I can't find solutions, to reach out for help, to ask for help, especially as men. That can be incredibly difficult for us, but I know for many women, it's equally difficult to ask for help and not perceive that as a weakness, but as a strength. So that's it. I want to finish on a note of gratitude to each of you. Thank you.
Tom, why don't you come in and join us and see if there's anything you want to say as a summary, and then open up the meeting.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. It's been a wonderful journey. The one thing which I was just talking about this the other night with the sponsee, how this ties back to self-esteem is I think it's important for us to take ownership of the effort that we put into our recovery process, right? And you read the piece in the 12 and 12, and I picked up with him a little bit later in the paragraph where it says, what we have received is a free gift, and yet usually, at least in some small part, we have made ourselves ready to receive it, right? And he downplays it. And I think the next sentence says, AA's manner of making ready to receive this gift lies in the practice of the 12 steps. So this transformation, this spiritual awakening, this, this new person that I've become has been because of the effort I've put in, my will put in a proper direction, in alignment, as Herb likes to do with his arm signal. And when I get aligned and I do, put in all this effort, and then I get to the other side. So it's important for me to take ownership of that and say, I've done some really hard work, some really good work to get to a place where I own part of this transformation, along with the community and my higher power and all that. And that I can hang my hat on in terms of my own self-esteem. And then the other piece, and I always use this as a juxtaposition. I know Herb has used this in terms of his 12-step talks, is the bedevilments, right? So in the chapter to agnostic, the part that's called the bedevilments talks about we had problems with our personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional nature. We were prey to misery and depression, blah, blah, blah. Talks about this lack of anchorage to spiritual values and a spiritual path. And can we rely on a higher power instead? I had those bedevilments even in recovery when I wasn't working a program. And later on, when I get to this 12th step, he just has this wonderful way of describing what that transformation is. And, the idea of a new consciousness, and I'm not going to read it and take up everyone else's time, but it's on page 124 for those who have the book. And it starts off, service gladly rendered, obligation squarely met. It's just a wonderful synopsis of how I've transformed and I've become this person that is no longer stuck in the bedevilments. And so again, that's such a juxtaposition in terms of how the change happens, and how I can build and own my self-esteem improvements as a result.
I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps, that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved. The forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. The first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. We're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.